Welcome to the iLearn Virtual Campus. Please sign up for a free iLearn membership on our website, check out our 7th annual conference coming next spring 2021, and let us know if you're interested in hosting events or leasing space on our campus by emailing campus@immersivelrn.org.
Okay, can you hear me now? Everyone can hear me? Okay, so welcome everyone. We are going to begin this next technical session. I'm here with Misha. She's going to be the the session share of the session. And we have lots of people in the road. Some are already are still on the expo hall. They are coming now. So let's begin the session. Misha is with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here and be actually sharing a session in a real room, or closest to a real room, I guess, different from Zoom that's been going on all year so far. And the this is session S9, Multi-Modal Interaction, and our first speaker is Tianren Luo, who is going to be talking about the Dream Experiment, a mixed reality user interface with natural multi-channel interaction for virtual experiments. So I'd like Tianren to come up to the podium as their video plays. The talk's going to be about 10 minutes long, and then we'll have a few minutes, 3 to 4 minutes of Q&A. If you could ask your questions over Hoover, I will moderate and ask after the talk. So, Tianren.
Hello everyone, it's my honor to speak here, and I'm very glad to share our paper, Dream Experiment, MR user interface with natural multi-channel interaction for virtual experiments with you today. My name is Tianren Luo, and I come from Hangzhou Normal University. The real experiments have many limitations such as danger, pollution, high cost, abstract, and invisible. MR provides users with a natural interface that can solve the limitations of the real experiments. However, traditional MR experimental environments also have some limitations, lack of robust 3D registration, virtual real occlusion, realistic interactive methods. This paper studies a set of MR technologies for middle school experimental environments and develop an MR user interface called Dream Experiment. The contributions of this paper are shown on this page. We use an experimental interaction scene to introduce the Dream Experiment. We use one RGB camera as the main camera and two RGB cameras as the auxiliary cameras. The final image rendered by MR is displayed by PC screen in real time. In addition, we also design sensors which generate odors and temperature. Tangible interaction with 6DOF has real sense of operation, attaching markers to the tangible devices and then performing 6DOF pose estimation is a method with high real-time accuracy and robustness. However, some devices are too thin to attach the markers. Some devices are large, heavy, or expensive. For these devices, we use virtual objects or replacement tangible objects. We study a multi-camera cooperative 3D registration algorithm to create a robust 6DOF interactive space, especially to solve the delta problem of registered virtual objects caused by inconsistent pose estimation when multiple cameras track the same mark in the same frame. We set a confidence level for each camera to do registration for a marker. The confidence level is calculated based on the distance and angle between the camera and the marker, and the ratio of marker pictures to the image. For details of the algorithm, please see our paper. This is the result of multi-camera algorithm. Affected by noise, the accuracy of the original depth information obtained by the depth camera is poor, especially translucent objects. But in MR experiments, the foreground objects are multi-layer and have tangible translucent devices. In order to correct the depth map of multi-layer objects, the accurate picture array of each foreground object is segmented through deep learning method. Then we correct the depth map of real scene by the picture mask of each object and the depth map of the 3D registered translucent devices. Finally, we render the occlusion relationship by comparing the virtual and real depth maps picture by picture. Segmentation uses a lightweight convolutional neural network called CBAM-UNet, which combines the convolutional block attention module with UNet. For details of the algorithm for correct and rendering, please see our paper. These are the results of our virtual real occlusion method. We designed multi-modal interaction methods for the experimental user interface, include tangible interaction, gesture interaction with touching, voice interaction to generate virtual devices, temperature and smell interaction. This is a demo for 3 experiments in Dream Experiment.
I can't hear anything. I wonder if I'm doing something wrong.
It is the same for me.
As far as I can tell, there's no sound right now in the video, but I can confirm.
Exactly, Misha. We just double check here, and it's not. There's no audio on these parts of the video.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
No problem.
From the real experimental and real present tasks. We set up for application experimental environments and for tasks to compare the effect of dream experiment with the traditional MR environments. After the ANOVA and post-hoc comparison test, the result shows the time performance is no significant difference from the real experimental environment and better than the traditional MR experimental environment. The results of questionnaires shows dream experiment is better than traditional MR experiment environments in user experience and better than real experiments in some respects. Hello everyone, it's my honor to speak difference from the real experimental environment and better than the traditional MR experimental environment. The results of questionnaires shows dream experiment is better than traditional MR experiment environments in user experience and better than real experiments in some respects.
I believe that is the end of the video. Is that right, Cameron?
Yes.
Okay, great. So while we wait for questions off of Hoover, since I don't see any right now, and we have, let's say about 4 to 5 minutes for questions for this talk. Why don't I start by asking a question? Can you talk a little bit about how the olfactory component was used as part of the experiments? Did it work automatically? Was it triggered by the user? Was it triggered by a particular tangible object? How was that integrated into the whole experimental setup? Cameron, can you hear me? Cameron?
Tyron, can you hear us?
My network is poor.
Okay. I was just asking about the olfactory system. How was that part of your experiment? How did it work?
Tyron, if you have issues with the microphone, you can try type on the public chat the answer. There's no problem with that. Maybe Tyron has some technical issues or connection problems.
But it seems like, I think, they come in and go out. So you think we should just move on to the next talk?
Okay, sure.
Okay, and we'll
No
post the
problem.
questions on Hoover, and maybe they can chat over there.
Perfect. I'll tell him on the private chat.
Okay, great. Thank you for the talk, Taryn. I'm going to move on to our next speaker for this session. The talk is titled Understanding Multimodal User Gesture and Speech Behavior for Object Manipulation in AR Using Elicitation. Our speaker is Adam Williams. If you want to come up to the podium, Adam, while your talk plays, that would be great. All right, let's...
Thank you. Hello, this
Hello,
is Adam
everyone.
Williams, and I'm presenting the paper titled Understanding Multimodal User Gesture and Speech Behavior for Object Manipulation and Augmented Reality Using Elicitation. This paper was done by myself, Jason Garcia, and Francisco Ortega. This is a elicitation study that was done in augmented reality. The goals of this work were to examine what user-defined gesture and speech interactions would look like within augmented reality, both as standalone interactions and as multimodal gesture and speech interactions. Augmented reality headsets are becoming more widespread, with new headsets planned for or already launched by most major technology firms. This is including Microsoft's HoloLens 2 and the glasses planned for release by Apple and Facebook. The issue is that we don't really understand what interaction should look like within these devices. Most headsets are shipping with gesture and speech inputs, but the best interaction mechanisms are still unclear. There's been a large body of work on elicitation, slightly less work on multimodal elicitation, and even few works doing elicitation in augmented reality. This is the first multimodal elicitation study for augmented reality, although there have been other multimodal works on mid-air gesture and speech for two-dimensional screens. This experiment first collected informed consent and demographics information from the participants, then played a video instruction. After the video was finished, participants put on the headset, which was the Magic Leap 1 optical see-through augmented reality head-mounted display. Once the headset was on, participants went through a practice round for each of the modalities used. These modalities were gesture alone, speech alone, and the combination of gesture and speech. During the practice, participants were told to use one or both hands, that any utterance was acceptable, and to play with and adjust the device. Participants then went through the three modalities in a counterbalanced order, and within each modality, they proposed an interaction for 17 randomly ordered referents. Between each modality, the NASA task load index was administered. The referents used in this study were translations on each axis, rotations about each axis, uniform scaling, selection, creation, and deletion. These were chosen to be generic interactions which may be used in three-dimensional interaction systems in augmented reality with environments like building or hands-on learning applications. The major aims of this work for the gesture modality were to collect an unbiased gesture set and to find the strengths of unimodal gesture interactions, as well as which reference they were best suited for. The major aims for the speech portion of this experiment were similar. The goals were to find common speech syntax usage and which reference speech was well suited for. This work also tested the combination of gesture and speech as a multimodal interaction technique. During that segment of the experiment, our goals were to find what the changes were from unimodal use to multimodal use for both gesture and speech interactions, to find the time difference between when a gesture is initiated and when speech is initiated, and to find which cases the combination of gesture and speech was better than either used individually. The gestures found in this study were largely one-handed, even though participants were told they could use either or both hands. In most cases, these commands had a clear winning gesture shown in the consensus set. However, in some cases, they were tied, shown above in tied gestures. Most interactions were direct manipulations. This was the case for all translations and most rotations, although yaw was done through an indirect gesture that was an index finger tracing a circle. Legacy gestures were found for the shrink, enlarge, and select commands. These were the touchscreen gestures for zoom control and a tap gesture. Create, interestingly, had the balloon gesture from the HoloLens 1 and a snapping gesture. The study took place around the time when the Marvel's Avengers Endgame movie was being shown in theaters. We believe this explains the snapping gesture for creation, which also occurred for deletion, but at a reduced rate. The speech interactions were largely executed with action direction pairs. This would be move up or go down or other two-word phrases. The category for other was mostly full of one-word commands, which could be move or down alone. When gestures were used with speech, the action direction pairs transitioned to more action direction object triads. These would be saying move that up and pointing or make that smaller. There was also an increased rate of single word commands augmented with a gesture. This might just be saying spin while circling the direction of the intended rotation. The video of the multimodal interactions was coded by hand with the time of the gesture being initiated and the time speech was initiated. These were measured as the first perceptible sound or movement made by the participant. These times are shown here. Along the x-axis is the time in milliseconds, with gesture initiation being time 0. We found that gestures nearly always precede speech, and that this was often by 151 milliseconds. Most of the outliers were from confusion as to which gesture to use or which speech to use. These findings cover all of the gestures found. In previous work, these findings have been cited, but they were cited for primarily didactic gestures, which are just pointing gestures, whereas these findings cover mostly manipulative gestures as seen with our translations and rotations. Out of this work, we find that gestures are well suited for direct manipulations, mostly for interactions that had a clear real-world corollary, such as pushing a block or pulling the block towards you. These interactions had high participant agreement on the appropriate gesture, and most of these gestures were reversible. So a move left and a move right might be different palm orientations of the same sliding gesture. After the studies, 18 of our 24 participants mentioned preferring gesture. We believe this is because most of our reference were fairly simple manipulations, and gesture alone was an easy way to achieve them. Speech was more promising for abstract commands where gestures exhibited low agreement rates. Speech was mentioned by a few participants as preferred because it would allow precise degrees of rotation and amounts of movement to be specified. In most cases, speech was preferred for the create and delete reference. The practice trials used a color change referent, which was not used during the main study, but most participants during the practice mentioned that speech was the preferred mechanism for that so that they could appropriately call out the color they wanted. When used together, people found rotations to be less demanding. In speech alone, people often gestured the rotation, even though it was not part of their interaction proposal. We believe this was to lessen cognitive load and to facilitate lexical access to the rotation term they wanted to use. This dual-channel communication also allowed for correcting erroneous speech. Participants would often say the wrong direction, but gesture the correct direction. This could be saying spin left and gesturing in a clockwise motion. When used together, people found rotations to be less demanding. In speech alone, people often gestured the rotation, even though it was not part of their interaction proposal. We believe this was to lessen cognitive load and to facilitate lexical access to the rotation term they wanted to use. This dual-channel communication also allowed for correcting erroneous speech. Participants would often say the wrong direction, but gesture the correct direction. This could be saying spin left and gesturing in a clockwise motion. The rotational reference seemed to cause the participants a lot of issue because they were not familiar with the terms yaw, pitch, and roll, although these terms were explained during the instruction. The combination of gesture and speech worked well for these because participants could indicate their desire to rotate the object through speech, but then resolve the direction and orientation of the rotation through gesture. A few participants spontaneously mentioned the degrees they intended the object to rotate. Out of this research, we recommend using both unimodal and multimodal gesture and speech interaction. Each interaction modality possesses its own merit. While some interactions were best suited for one modality, like translations were to direct manipulation gestures, personal preference plays into the way people will choose to interact with the system. When possible, all interactions should be made to be reversible. Nearly every gesture and utterance produced was reversible. For rotations, this was very visible. Spin one way and the other way would just be a different direction of circling with the index finger or grabbing and turning the object in opposite directions. With the translation reference, this was nearly always a swipe gesture, but the palm orientation might change, and as a part of the palm orientation changing, the arm used may change. As with most elicitation studies, we found legacy bias present in our gesture proposals. This bias led to a higher agreement rate on the select gesture, which was a finger tap, and on the scale gestures, which mirror smartphone zoom in and zoom out gestures. This native familiarity with the touchscreen interactions can be leveraged when implementing these systems, as the tap gesture and the zoom gestures seem to be appropriate for the new interaction modality, mid-air gesture. However, care should be taken to avoid implementing inappropriate interactions from prior technologies. To recap, the study used a multimodal three-input condition elicitation study in augmented reality to find appropriate gesture interactions and speech syntaxes for object manipulation environments. Because these inputs were tested individually and combined, we also present findings on shifts in interaction when switching from unimodal to multimodal use. The multimodal gesture and speech examination also allowed for an analysis of the timing information of interactions, which in this study found that gestures nearly always precede speech by around 151 milliseconds. Thank you for attending this presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have now, or if you like, you can email them to me at adamwill@colostate.edu.
All right, thank you, Adam, for that presentation. Very interesting work. And while I look towards Hua for questions, maybe I will start by asking you one.
Sure, thank you.
So during the talk, you mentioned that, some of the gestures might have, at least one might have come from the movie that people were watching at the time you were doing the study, the Avengers movie. And I'm wondering what opportunity we have here for gestures that are used in mass media like that for communication to actually be co-opted into AR, as opposed to, right now it clearly seems like, a lot of the gestures, some of them are coming from our real world interactions, some of them are coming from our screen-based interactions. I'm wondering if people are already familiar with something that they've seen in movies. Is that an opportunity for us to use it as a new gesture in AR or other spatial interaction systems?
Yeah, I think definitely. Most of the interactions that had real world corollaries will just match whatever somebody would do in the real world. But for interactions that are slightly more abstracted, or things that can kind of only be done on a computer, like scaling, using gestures from prior devices or media seems like a great idea to lower the time people spend learning. Might be difficult to figure out which gestures and media are popular enough. I think Marvel's movie was maybe an exception in terms of like popularity, at least with the average age of our demographic.
Right, I guess. But if something is popular and it gets used, then it also becomes something that people learn, and it ultimately becomes intuitive, right? So.
I believe so, yeah.
All right, great. Does the audience have any questions? Feel free to ask through public chat here. Again, Huva, or if you want to just speak up by raising your hand, then maybe I could point out one has a question. All right, so again, while we wait, just another quick question. So it sounded like, or it looked like, people were using both finger-based gestures and hand-based gestures, but the study was mostly single-handed, right?
Yeah, we found almost all of our gestures were single-handed, and we think that might be the size of the object they were manipulating was maybe the size of a coffee cup. So most participants probably just used one hand. We did tell them they could use two hands if they wanted to. This came up for scaling a couple of times, and maybe rotations where somebody would mimic turning a steering wheel, but not very commonly.
That is kind of interesting, because that almost implies gestures potentially are contextual, right? If you had a big box that they had to move, they probably wouldn't have been using fingers. I don't know, but I'm just thinking relatively to what we would do in the real world for a big box versus a coffee cup.
Yeah,
the interactions.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a study that did something similar. I think they had a wall and a box with the same movement options, and participants more often use two hands or larger gestures to move the wall than the box.
Cool. So you think the gestures can be translated just as well into VR, or you think because, I mean, yes, a lot of VR has handheld controllers, but let's say we're using just hands.
Yeah, I think they would translate well. The only thing that I think is important is the rendering of the hands. With the optical see-through headset, participants could see their hands pretty clearly, and often they would try to match the shape of their hand to the cube they're manipulating. In VR, if the hands aren't shown, I'm not sure if those same hand poses would show up, but the same types of movements probably would.
Right, good point. Again, does anyone have any questions? I don't see anything on Hoover either yet, so I guess, yes?
Sorry, I think there is a question on Hoover, but just in the main chat, just
Okay.
asking about if the participants were left-handed.
We had 2 participants that were left-handed, and of the left-handed gesture, we didn't notice any major differences in their gesturing. For translations, whether participants were left-handed or right-handed, it seemed like move right was mostly done with the left hand and move left was done with the right hand.
Oh, okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Give Adam a hand and let's move on to the next talk. Thank you very much, Adam, for your presentation, for answering the questions.
Yeah, thank you. There's one more in Hoop I'll answer really quickly while I sit down.
Okay.
It was just that did scale of the gestures vary, and it did not. Mostly they were pretty constrained to be within the field of view of the device, which was 2 feet square in front of the user, maybe.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, let's move on to our next speaker of the session. And that speaker is Brandon Sam, and they're going to be talking about enhancing visitor experience or hindering docent roles, attentional issues in augmented reality supported installations.
Hello, everyone. Hello, and thank you everyone for joining. In this session, we will talk about how augmented reality is used in supporting installations with multiple means of content delivery and the challenges that come with it. Augmented reality is rapidly gaining popularity in fields such as marketing, navigation, gaming, surgery, and so on, and enables users to access relevant and contextual information. On top of this, research has also suggested that augmented reality enhances engagement with presented content and can be advantageous in learning applications. However, there are concerns that have been brought forward that AR can cause issues in relation to user safety and awareness. Researchers have expressed such concerns when using AR in situations such as driving, walking, and biking, detection of events and objects, engagement with physical artifacts, and engagement with physical learning material. These concerns largely stem from the observation that users tend to focus their attention primarily on the virtual element while neglecting their physical surroundings. We liken this observation to the attention tunneling effect, where users focus their attention on one channel of information, in this case, the virtual channel, while neglecting other channels. This effect has been primarily studied in the context of heads-up displays, but has also been linked to AR displays. This can be problematic, especially in instances where we want users to look at both the physical and the virtual elements. This raises the question, how does the design of AR-supported installations affect user attention and experience, especially when the installation incorporates multiple modalities to deliver content? Which brings us to our study of Rewild Our Planet. This was a multimodal installation that used AR, video, audio, to spread awareness about the destruction of the environment and the efforts made in its conservation. It was described as a social augmented reality experience where users could collectively interact with the virtual elements to bring about some positive change to devastated virtual biomes. The installation was set up in a large dimly lit room and consisted of a sloping platform. The center of this platform was a circular pedestal, as can be seen here and here. A large AR globe would be placed on top of the virtual globe. The alignment isn't perfect in this picture though. Video content was projected behind the circular pedestal, as can be seen in the images on the right, here and here. The platform itself was the primary zone of engagement. This is where the AR elements would be populated. And this platform was also tagged with multiple markers that were used for AR localization. The AR content itself could be viewed through a smartphone that was handed to visitors before the start of each session. Prior to the start of the session, a docent would deliver a brief summary of the installation. The session would then start and was divided into 3 different phases. The learn phase is where visitors could learn about the different biomes that were available and vote on which biome they would like to experience. The play phase is where the core message related to natural conservation of the selected biome would be delivered. This phase also introduced a mechanic where visitors could heal the devastated virtual biome. And the act phase, which prompts users to make a metaphorical pledge to help the environment. This was then followed by an outro, which was also delivered by the docent. We conducted a field study and employed ethnographic methods for data collection. We observed around 284 visitors using the system. We did this by standing at the back of the room so that we didn't disrupt the user experience in any way. At the end of each session, we would also move towards the exit and ask groups of visitors if we could interview them. We interviewed about 45 groups of visitors in total. We found that the design of the installation affected both the visitors and the docent running the installation. We observed that while there was clear instructions on both the AR devices and the projector display, the sheer amount of information and complexity of the installation would overwhelm users. This resulted in the need for the docent to step in and adopt different roles in order to ensure a smooth experience for the visitors. We classified the different roles into 5 categories, the first 4 of which were drawn from Yule et al.'s Operation Citadel. The docent would act as a guide, where they would direct the visitors' attention to various points of interest within the AR device and the video. As an interpreter, the docent would clarify instructions presented on the AR device or the projected display that was not very obvious to some visitors. The docent would also act as a social facilitator and a performer. They did this by adding an outro section in the later sessions, where they would reinforce the message of conservation and also encourage visitors to discuss among themselves what they could do or what steps visitors could take individually to alleviate some of the environmental problems. Lastly, the docent would also step in to correct technical issues. These were tiny issues such as AR localization issues. These roles, however, were often hindered by the fact that visitors' attention was primarily focused on the AR device, which brings us to our next set of findings related to visitor attention. Our main observation was that visitors focus almost exclusively on the AR device, making it very difficult for the docent to guide them or to facilitate any sort of social interaction. This led to a more individual experience as opposed to a social one. It also led to visitors only experience the installation through the AR device, making the content delivered by the video, audio, and docent mostly go unnoticed. This excessive focus on the AR content also led to the split attention effect, where visitors found it difficult to discern a message because the content they were visually attending to was not aligned very well to the content they were hearing. Because the content they were hearing was corresponded to the video rather than the AR content. This meant that the visitors had to integrate the 2 sources of information before they could discern any message, and led to problems of understanding the core message of the installation and also understanding certain instructions. Given these issues, we put forward 5 design guidelines to handle the attentional issues and provide a better experience for visitors. Our first guideline is to incorporate the human component, employing participatory design and including the human operator in the design process could benefit the operator as well as enhance user experience by providing a seamless blend between the narrative delivered through the technology and the human operator. There are successful examples of this in the works of Yule and Dow and McIntyre. Our second guideline suggests taking advantage of the knowledge that users will focus on the AR content and design around this fact. For instance, the core message could be delivered through the AR content rather than the video, as was the case in Revolve. Other modalities such as audio and video could be used to support the AR content. Our third guideline aims to mitigate split attention effect. This effect, as mentioned previously, makes it difficult to discern messages. One way to fix this, especially in an installation like Revolve, is to align the audio content to the AR content, as we know visitors will be attending primarily to the AR device. Our fourth guideline is to enhance the user experience, and it would be to incorporate purposeful exploration. In the case of Rewild, exploring the AR elements did not yield any benefits to communicating the core message of the installation. Adding some exploratory elements that are not essential to the narrative, but add interesting details related to the narrative could be a way to take advantage of users' attention onto the AR device while keeping things interesting. Lastly, to take advantage of the social aspect of the experience, we suggest implementing some collaborative mechanics. We propose two different types of collaborative methods. Docent-centered collaboration, where the docent has control over what virtual elements to bring up, what virtual tasks to bring up, and they could facilitate this task and encourage multiple visitors to take part in this task. And secondly, we propose task-centered collaboration, where a task is presented that can only be solved by groups of visitors working together, thus requiring visitors to work together in order to progress the narrative. In conclusion, the design of the AR-supported installations can affect the workings of both the human operator and the user's attention and experience. Careful considerations must be made when integrating AR into installations with multiple sources of content delivery. Our paper highlights challenges related to the design of AR-supported installations and offers guidelines to handle them. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for that talk, Brandon. All right, so I see a question on who I'm going to start with that. Question is from Diego Monteiro, and they're asking, is it possible that the problem was not AR per se, but the focus required to actually hold the AR device?
Definitely. We detail this in the paper, but there could be multiple causes to why users' attention was focused on the AR content or the AR device per se. One was because of the marketing of the whole Rewild installation was centered around augmented reality and the social augmented experience. The other thing could be also that at the start of each session, you were handed this phone, giving a sense that you're supposed to experience this installation through the phone. So there could be multiple causes of why users tunnel their attention into the AR device. But there's also works, previous works that do state that AR content does cause this phenomenon of attention tunneling.
Great. I don't see any other questions right away, so maybe I'll ask you one. How much, I mean, in addition to the factors that you mentioned, how much do you think is novelty at play here versus you think this is going to be somewhat similar to how people walking down the street looking at their phone and running into obstacles? Is this something that's just going to be a problem that exists?
So I do think novelty is a big factor here. There have been other studies that have shown that introducing a multi-touch tabletop in a museum exhibition causes people to focus more on the tabletop rather than the exhibits as well. So there is a factor that novelty could also cause users to focus their attention on the AR device. But I think there's multiple factors to this particular issue, rather than just the novelty.
So then it sounds like it sort of almost has or requires individual solutions per use case, looking at all the factors that might impact it versus sort of having a generalized solution of, at least maybe a more generalized solution.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, I was wondering if you think then, because there's so many factors impacting it, that the solutions will have to be very specifically designed for the particular use case versus being a bit more generalizable.
Yes, I think the installation itself or installation needs to be studied prior to rolling out a solution to it. But our guidelines are a bit more general in that aspect.
Okay. All right, there's one more question. Is do you plan on doing a long-term study to look into the effect of novelty on attention tunneling? I guess that's what we were talking about a second ago.
Yes, actually, we did think about this, but the installation itself was only running for about 3 months, if I'm not mistaken, in 3 different locations. So we couldn't do that with this particular installation, and we definitely think that is in the future works.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much again, and let's move on to our last speaker of the session. Thank you, Brandon.
Very much.
Our last speaker today is Sinu George, talking about invisible boundaries for VR, auditory and haptic signals as indicators for real-world boundaries. It's Sinu's audio may not be working so well, so we're going to have to sort of improvise and see how we do the QA. And
hi everyone, I'm Sinu George from the LMU in Munich, and today I'd like to present our paper called Invisible Boundaries for VR, Auditory and Haptic Signals as Indicators for Real-World Boundaries. Before we move on, I'd like to introduce you to Lucy and Tom. Lucy here is wearing a head-mounted display, and Tom is working on a laptop. My research over the last years has been within this co-located collaborative context, where one person is wearing a head-mounted display and other people are working on other digital technologies. So in this context, we know that ubiquitous devices create a disconnect between the virtual and the physical reality. However, here, Lucy, who's wearing the head-mounted display, has disadvantage because she cannot see the real environment. She can only see the virtual environment. However, her body is still in the real environment. And Tom, he can see both environments. So we think that HMDs heighten this disconnect between the virtual and the physical reality. And my research has
did we lose audio on the presentation?
Yes, Misha, you're just checking. Sorry about the inconvenience.
see both environments. So we think that HMDs heighten this disconnect between the virtual and the physical reality. And my research has
Hello, everyone. We're just checking the video again. It seems to be some small failure on it, exactly on this part. So just some minutes, okay? Sorry. Thanks. Hello, Misha.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe we can ask the author to give some highlights quickly of the paper, because the last part of the video had some strong problems. Our technical team is trying to solve, but maybe it's better just to give some highlights.
Okay, I know Sinu mentioned she's having some audio troubles at her and microphone troubles, so we could try. Do you like to give it a shot, Sinu?
Hey, Misha. Can you give me a second to bring up the presentation on my side as well? Then I can quickly
Sure.
give you some highlights that I was
Absolutely,
that I
yes.
was seeing in the video. Okay.
Yes, please. Okay, I guess while we wait for Sinu to bring up her presentations, how is the conference going for everybody? I'm not really sure if there's a thumbs up or thumbs or anywhere. Is everyone enjoying being in 3D versus doing this over Zoom? That's good to hear, Daniel. It is fun to try in VR. Definitely with this many people being able to be in the same room. I think earlier in the spring when we were at IEEE VR, then in hubs, there is a number of people limit to each room. Nice. It's good to hear. It's like being in a video game.
Okay.
Serious game. Yes. All right. You ready, Sina?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sure.
Get away.
Okay. So basically, so my research looks into reducing this disconnect between the virtual and the physical reality. And I basically, in this work that we've done, we looked into how we can use auditory and haptic signals to inform about changes in the physical reality. And in this specific project, we're looking at how we can report on physical boundaries, so walls, for example. And we're basing our research on work by Wiccans, who looked into how senses can be allocated to different tasks without an increase in workload. And we're basically taking that to allocate the auditory and haptic our senses on the physical reality and our visual sense on the virtual reality. And we were hoping that this way the visual sense can focus on the visual experience, and thus presence can be maintained. And yeah, we go into more detail in the paper on this. Don't know how many minutes I have. Basically, we did a study, an explorative study, where we let people play a game of The Floor is Lava. I'm not sure, maybe you heard of it. It's basically you have to avoid certain tiles that are turning into lava, and we created a game in virtual reality for this. And we chose this game specifically because we wanted to really force people to get to the walls of the play area, so that they would trigger the boundary signals, the auditory and haptic ones. And yeah, we measured a number of things, so the performance, error rate, and known things such as presence and workload. And we did some follow-up interviews, and we also report on our observations. And so in the paper, we give recommendations on how we want to proceed with this, with these early findings that we made. And we discuss how the design space of audio signals, so the signals that we used were basically warning signals. So similar to when you're parking a car, for example, and you're about to hit the car behind you. So we're discussing basically how the warning signals, although they led to success in a way that people weren't hitting the walls or the physical walls, basically. Although I have to say, we did have some there were some meters between the actual wall and the boundary that we set, but people weren't hitting the boundary, so the warning signals did work, but they also created a high workload, which we discuss in the paper. So as a next step, we would probably look at the design space of audio signals and actually figure out exactly what frequency and what type of audio signals and what spacing we would want to introduce this. So we're discussing that, and we're also discussing, and also as a limitation of the study, that we actually combined the haptic and the auditory signals in this study that we're reporting in this paper. But what we want, and this, we think that this combination actually also led to a high increase of workload, and we're proposing to actually split this and only focus on auditory and haptic signals. And yeah, I think overall that's probably it. For the rest, you can look at the paper or get in touch with me. It's a bit last minute to tell you, but I think that's what I can see in here now.
Okay, well, no worries. Thank you very much for, this is great. And sorry about the disruption in the video and springing this upon you at the last minute. Right, okay, so we have a couple of minutes for questions, and I don't really see anything on Hoover just yet, so maybe I could ask. Right, talking about audio and haptic signals together, I was wondering if there was just one level of signal or warning, or there was sort of incremental over time depending on the urgency of how close they got to the boundary.
Yeah, so in this in the study that we're reporting in the paper, they were incremental. So we really were trying to mimic a familiar signal, such as the one in a car where you're getting closer to the car behind you. Mm-hmm. So it was incrementally getting louder from a user perspective.
Okay, and haptics was the same, or did that also change?
Haptics was also the same. Yeah, we report on that in the paper, how the haptics. So we had a lot of trial and error sessions before we actually ran the study to match the haptics with the audio. So yeah, that was basically the same. Yeah.
Okay, great. I am seeing a couple of questions in the public chat here. For some reason, it's not showing on my Hoover, so I'm going to ask from here. Lucas is asking whether people had time. Where did it go? people had time to learn the audio signals?
Yeah, so we had different training sessions. We actually had one training session where, so there were two different groups. One was doing the blinded training session, so really focusing on the auditory and haptic signals without seeing the virtual world at all at the beginning. And there was a second group also that was in also not seeing the virtual reality, but seeing the physical reality, and hearing the auditory and haptic borders. So they were really familiarizing themselves in different rounds with the auditory and haptic signals before we introduced the virtual world to them, because of the visual dominance that we have, right? So.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. So that question was actually from Diego Montero. Again, I still don't see it on Hoover, so I'm going to ask what Lucas reposted on public chat here. How were the haptics conveyed? Was it the controllers, or did you use some other haptic device that you built for the study, or something else?
No, this was the first study that we did in this project, so we only worked with the controllers. But yeah, we're looking at different solutions at the moment, and we're just waiting to get the studies approved again with users. But yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Are there any other questions here in the audience? I don't see any hands raised nor anything on public chat, and for whatever reason, my Hoover doesn't want to refresh. Show me the questions. All right, so I think with that, we will call the session done. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and all the speakers for answering questions and being here on stage. And I hope everybody else has a great time at the conference. I'll hope to see you around and talk to many of you.
Yeah, thank you very much as well from me. And sorry about the slides. I'm not sure what happened, but I just saw the link was just sent out. So
yes, right. Okay, I guess now we can all dance. Session's over.
Yeah, that's correct, Misha.
I'm
thanks
gonna try
again.
it.
Yeah, thanks for this great session. Congrats to the authors. I'm really sorry, Senu, for these technical problems. And
no
just
worries,
to let
I'm
you,
just trying to turn around.
No problem. And just to let you dance for sure, we're going to have the second part of the concert from Brazilian popular music. And we are going to play another part right now. So enjoy. We will come back in 11 minutes with the next technical session. So thank you.
Hey, Misha.
Hi, I'm trying to shake hands with you.
Yeah, I'm trying to do something as well, but I feel like I'm way too close.
Yeah, it's kind of point of view changes. But still.
Yeah, it's just...
Oh, there comes the music. All right. I think I'm gonna go out and wander around and look at some posters again. I didn't get a chance to see them all.
Yeah, go for it. It's getting late where I am. So.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again.
Yeah,
oh, look.
thanks. Bye.
Francisco's dancing, I think. All right, Francisco. See you later.
It's a pleasure.
Vindo de lá, dos fogos africanos, meu maracatu. já vem sambar. Maracá, Yorubá, nadou chegando do Maracatu, já vem de lá. Ela vem, Dona Santa, vem coroar, cortejo já vem. Ela vem com prazer, trazer nosso rei, Calunga também. Vem reger as nações num só coração, Zabumba soar. Lá, começo de tudo, um bico do novo tempo a cantar.
Hi, Henry. Just wondering if you're there. Maybe just an uninhabited avatar.
Vem coroar nosso rei, nossa paz, reina, reina, vem coroar. Pra tocar seu tambor do carnaval, começar nosso rei carnaval.
Hi, Ron. Doing? Hear me? Yes. How you doing? Okay. Good. I have to say, this is a very weird experience.
Yeah, I think actually the whole room can probably hear us talking.
Not the whole room, only part of the room. I'm not sure what the sound around us is, but people up in the balcony can't hear.
I tried with Mark out on the beach, and yeah, I think there's a fair radius. Like Christian's behind you, so you can probably hear us right now.
That's possible.
Yeah,
He responds.
I'm on the other side of the room. I can hear you.
Yeah, but we can barely hear him. Could be because he's not closer.
Let me try it now. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, but it's a little. Maybe you're not using a headset.
Yeah.
Yeah. You even did the bow. I have to do the bow also.
Are you gonna? You want to jump to a different location if you want to talk for a bit, or no?
Sure.
No, not jump.
Hi, Dan.
Sure. Do you want to go somewhere?
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sounds good.
You
Well,
want
it's
to
actually it's 5 minutes to the.
Yeah, this is a
talk.
little bit
How about
loud,
you?
right? Like,
You have time after?
way to treat it personally.
I may have a little time after. We're trying to get a paper done, and let me see if I have my calendar. Yeah, I actually could talk at Well, I guess it's 11. No, it's 9 p.m. Recently time, or 7 p.m. New York time. Does that work for you? The 9 p.m.
I thought you were in Arizona.
I'm in Arizona. Yes, that's true. But I'm teaching at Columbia, so I'm still trying to be on a combination of Mountain Standard, rather and Eastern Standard. So
Okay, so is that at the end of this thing then?
the end of, I believe it's the end of the session.
Okay. Where do you want to go to after that then?
We
The
could
beach or
simply, yeah, let's go to the beach.
Okay, go to the beach afterwards. Okay.
Okay. And I'm going to wander around a little bit more right now. Yeah, there's a lot of bugs in the system, I have to say. Anyway. See ya.
See ya.
Later. Bye.
O que agora me faz aqui presente?
Welcome to the iLearn Virtual Campus. Please sign up for a free iLearn membership on our website. Check out our seventh annual conference coming 2021, and let us know if you're interested in hosting events or leasing space on our campus by emailing campus@immersivelrn.org.